years after I should have. Some of the students probably agreed, but I've had an opportunity to continue with a lot of the research that I'd initiated there, not at Purdue, but internationally, and I've always had a lot of international involvement. Involved in a project in China from 1990 to 2000, where we brought 3 million acres of the Gobi Desert under irrigation. Similar involved previous to that with part of the development of the Cerrado in Brazil, and before that in the Idaho, Oregon development project. So most of my work has been on soil-borne diseases and nutrient disease interactions. And I guess the last 20 years in the research at Purdue was researching how do we remediate and offset the damage that I was seeing with the Roundup chemical as well as the GMO crops when they were introduced in 1996. Had the opportunity to get involved with veterinarians initially fairly early on, and then with some of the medical people. I guess throughout that period, relative to animal diseases and human diseases that are involved, I've had a lot of research on the plant diseases, and so through the team programs, been able to kind of stretch that to see what the overall scope of interactions are. I'm retired colonel, Army, retired as Associate Director of the Armed Forces Medical Intelligence Center, so Purdue was reimbursed fairly royally for my half-time with the Department of Defense, and Purdue wanted full-time, and Department of Defense wanted full-time, but it has provided an opportunity then to be involved in a number of different areas that I wouldn't have had that opportunity otherwise. So I serve on our inspection team for the biological and chemical treaty compliance, and several other of our inspection teams internationally involved, but then also have individual consulting in the agriculture or the health areas with a number of countries. I've spent about a week a month in Guatemala on sugarcane, bananas, coffee, and avocados. And we have, I guess, probably a fourth of the country now in Guatemala that is all glyphosate free, Roundup free. El Salvador just banned all glyphosate 3 weeks ago. It took the loss of 25% of their male population to do that from end-stage kidney failure. And that's, initially it was because of the heat and dehydration, but we've had that for 200 years in the sugar cane there. The difference was the 10 years of Roundup using it as a ripening agent. And if you look at the Yakima Times 3 weeks ago, it had a big article on glyphosate, Three Rivers, and anencephaly. And they have a major epidemic of stillbirths and children being born with neural tube deficiency and only half a brain. So if they're born alive, you get to hold your child for 24 or 48 hours. And so had that opportunity to tie in with a number of other people. I'm probably a weak sister on most of those projects, but it's sure fun to be the mule working with Kentucky Derby winners. And, so I've enjoyed that relationship and the opportunity to keep going and continue, hopefully being of service in that area.
How old are you?
I don't know whether you want specific programs or research, but that's kind of a overview. My wife and I celebrate our 55th wedding anniversary in 19th of February. She was told that she only had 3 months to live 2 years ago. So we're grateful for some help, for some counsel we received from 2 doctors that said, and our oncologist said, there's no chemotherapy or radiation that we can use. It's way too advanced. And little divine intervention with the help of those 2 doctors that said, now you start, get on milk thistle and red yeast rice extract that will stop cancer cell development, and on a product called Cal that is 90% cysteine from whey. So you beef up your glutathione and let the body then attack those cells, and the liver tumor was gone about 6 months. I had about a 2-inch, very aggressive liver tumor, and the all of the bone cancer now, which old skeleton lit up like a Christmas tree with sugar dye, and all of that's in full remission now. And so we'll celebrate that anniversary. And I have 42 grandchildren, 3 great grandchildren.
Been farming.
So it's been fun to be able to squeeze them a little bit, send them home. But a number of different active projects. I guess the thing that brought notoriety was when I wrote the letter to Secretary Vilsack and asking him for some help in identifying a new entity that causes reproductive failure and infertility and miscarriage, that in animals as well as in humans, and to hold off on Roundup Ready alfalfa until the research was done, because it's in the high in genetically engineered crops where we find this entity, and been working on it for a long time. The veterinarians have, trying to decide whether it's a new life form or some other entity that self-replicates. But Michael Antonio of King's College Medical School, who's the mad cow expert, the prion expert for internationally, said a 95% chance that it's a prion. Terry Turney in Australia, an anatomist, says, and Arden Anderson, some of you know, said, well, there's 95% chance that it's biomatrix, which we used to refer to as nanobacter. It's a self-replicating crystal with some unique characteristics for chelating amino acids and forming a protein sheath, much like our prion-like strands on it, or remote possibility it's a new life form. So we haven't published that, but that was, the purpose of the letter was to ask for some help. It was a very private letter. I didn't send it through the mail because at the time I was chairman of the USDA's National Plant Disease Recovery Program, and I sent it up with a friend for personal delivery so that it wouldn't be compromised. I was really afraid that if it was made public that it would impact our exports, and that before we really knew what the epidemiology looked like, and that letter was leaked. Don't know who did it, but my USDA colleagues believe that it was someone on the American Soybean Board, because Bill sent it to the soybean board in Monsanto before he even shared it with risk management. And I figured it would go to Humphreys, or when I've been risk management that I've worked with for a number of years. I couldn't send it there directly because it would have been squashed very early, and thought maybe with the secretary's attention he could move that along and we could get the help that we needed. That didn't pan out. I guess 3 or 4 months after the letter was written, risk management finally got hold of it and asked me for names and details of the 4 concerns that I'd raised. I was able to give them the names of 6 veterinarians and a couple of doctors and a couple of physicists, a number of other people that were all involved in that research on the abortogenic agent. When I checked back with those people 6 months later, I had permission to share their names. And one of the reasons I didn't put it in the letter to the secretary is that everybody who is identified doing that research loses their job or is shut down. And that's not just here, that's internationally. You look at Ph.D, you look at what's happening to Sarah Linney, look at Judy Carmen in Australia, and you look at a number of people here in this country. And so that, but the situation was getting serious enough that I wrote the letter. It was leaked, and consequently, some of the people were concerned that their names would be identified outside of that risk management group that had to have that information. And so I said, well, I'll put the target on my back, and now that it's been leaked and the information's there, we have an obligation to at least share some of the information that we know, and then hopefully encourage more research and get the identification that we have to have before we can really publish the other data. So consequently, I've been able to travel more than I should, but appreciate the opportunity that I've had to share a lot of that information. Tremendous amount of research that's available that is very difficult to publish. And you see the censorship that's going on with Sarah Linney's paper. The only long-term study on GMO crops and glyphosate, the journal Chemical Toxicology just redacted that paper. Been out for a year, had the most intensive review that most papers have ever had. Very sound science. In fact, Europe has just adopted the protocol as a protocol for standard toxicology testing. But the reason for redacting was that there was one area on cancer that they said needs further study. It's pretty clear cut. The increased incidence of cancer coming in, starting at about 4 months on a 2-year study on the rats, but they said that, you know, this is a toxicology study for kidney and liver and other toxicity, but the cancer was so apparent that but it wasn't part of the design of the experiment, and said that we need more study on it. That's the item that the journal said. We're redacting it until that other study, those other studies are done. Now the redaction came about a couple of months after Richard Goodman, who is an employee of Monsanto, was appointed as assistant editor for biotechnology. And so it's never happened before in science and scientific publication. It's a first. Total abuse of the system. I don't know whether it'll be reinstated. They had over 250 scientists around the world that have criticized the journal and asked that it be reinstated. So the only other study that we have for long-term toxicology is a 5-month feeding study in Iowa of pigs with Judy and Howard Vlieger. Judy's a well-known, internationally recognized toxicologist in Australia that came up to oversee that project. Excellent study, very damning of GMO products in the feed. But that's the only one. Everyone else has been shut down, from Pustai and Carrasco, the whole series. So there's a tremendous amount of censorship, and just told everybody if it's okay, since I wrote the letter, I'll assume responsibility and try and be a moving target, and we'll go from there. Again, some really great people, dedicated people that are working in this area. Just hard to get the information out.
Any questions for Dr. Huber here for a second?
Does this compound cause problems here in Illinois in humans?
Tremendous problems in humans throughout the country.
Failure you mentioned.
You look at those 38 diseases, and the curve is this way. It's an exact fit for most of those, or a couple of them. Obesity that's a little goes up this way rather than this way with the adoption of the GMO crops. But you have to remember too that most medical data is about 10 years lag. So that what's there today is cast in stone for the next 10 years at least. If you stop today, you'll see that lag effect. Now there's a few exceptions, but if you look at it in 1970, I think the incidence of autism was 1 to 2 per 100,000. Right now it's 1 in 50, and by 2025 it's predicted to be 1 in 2. That's a tragedy for any society. It's supposed to have a 20% increase in Alzheimer's in 20 years. And CDC, not in your 60 and 70-year-olds, but in your 40 and 50-year-olds. You look at leaky gut, look at Crohn's, look at gluten intolerance. Anyone here that doesn't know of someone that doesn't have gluten intolerance, celiac, breast cancer, leaky gut, difficile diarrhea, Parkinson's. You can just go down the list. Hypertension, deaths from hypertension.
You know,
all of those track the same.
you know, Don, one of the things that's kind of interesting, I had my college roommate 2 weeks before Thanksgiving had a kidney removed. And I thought it was really interesting, and one of Dr. Bax's compadres here in the Sangamon Medical Society says, how come I'm taking kidneys out of farmers? And it's like, whoa, I mean, so it's great that they're starting to recognize that, that there's, there's lots of times there's lots of prescriptions without diagnosis, and here maybe they're starting to look at it a little better.
Yeah, end-stage kidney failure is very common. I work with Dr. Malcolm Sumner from the University of Georgia in Guatemala. He goes down, he actually works all of Central America. I'm just in Guatemala and Costa Rica. But while we were down there, he got a call from Georgia and asking if he could help them out because of their having end-stage kidney failure and chronic fatigue.
Then we'll go ahead and let Gabe maybe make a little.
How am I supposed to follow that? What? I'm beginning to wonder, what have I done with my life?
Yeah, you've done a lot. Just, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about our operation. Along with my son Paul here, and my wife Shelley, we own a 5,000 acre ranch near Bismarck, North Dakota, and we have both cropland and livestock. And what started me on this path, where I got to meet guys like Walter, back in 1995, we had our first 4 crop failures in a row, where we lost 100% of our crop to either hail or drought. It was 3 years of hail and 1 of drought, and we were basically broke and couldn't borrow any money to operate. And so because we couldn't borrow any money, of course couldn't buy fertilizers and herbicides and all those things. And I had to learn on my own, how do we make our soils productive without those type of inputs. And so it started me on a path of growing cover crops and improving soil health. And I didn't know that at the time, but we started to see a real change in our soils and an improvement in our quality of life and in the produce or the products that we were producing. So now it's more or less become our passion to regenerate our soils, and we've tied it in with the human health aspect. The United States now is now the 42nd healthiest country in the world. I mean, that's a travesty. We should be number 1. We should be the healthiest, but we're not, for reasons like Dr. Huber has stated. And what we've been able to do on our operation is take our soils from a very degraded state to a much healthier state, where now we no longer use any synthetic fertilizers, fungicides, pesticides, and yet our yields are 25+% above the county average. And we're producing what we consider to be very healthy foods and healthy meats because of it. And so for the last 10 years, I've pretty much spent all winter, every winter, speaking around the United States, Canada, and Australia, and explaining to producers and consumers that the health of our resources directly affects human health, and we can't continue to degrade our resources and expect to have a healthy society. And so it's become a passion of ours to get this message to as many people as we can.
Is this like 50 years ago?
Yeah.
60 years ago?
Unfortunately. The interesting thing was, and I shared this in the presentations I gave at this conference, there's a bookstore down near the conference center where I was told about it, and so Paul and I went down there to this bookstore, and they had some papers from the 1860s to 1880s, and I was looking through those papers. They were agricultural papers, and they were talking about the destruction of the soil resource then. Farmers better do something. That was 150 years ago, and we still haven't done anything. And what a travesty that is. And so that's what we're about in our operation, is just trying to get the message out, trying to connect consumers to farmers and the products that we produce, and trying to get healthier products because
Are
of
you
that.
making more money as a result?
Put it this way, at the end of those 4 years, in 1998, those 4 years, I was broke, and we had a
Right.
mountain of debt. You know, as of about 4 or 5 years ago, I could have retired, handed the farm over debt-free to my son, and we could live for the rest of our lives. I made more money in a 10-year period, because we're able to be least cost producers. You know, it really bothers me that you always hear, how are we gonna produce enough food for 9 billion people?
Yeah,
That is absolutely no problem. We're already producing enough calories to feed the world. It's in distribution and waste is where the problem is. But we're not producing nutrient-dense calories. So what we do on our operation, you know, you drive around the country and, you know, through the corn belt, it's corn and soybeans. That's all that's being produced. Well, on our operation, we produce, and I'd have to add it up, probably a dozen or more different cash crops. Then we have beef cattle, we have chickens, we have laying hens, you know, we have all these different enterprises, sheep stacked on the same acres. So we're getting much, much more pounds of nutrition off of each acre. You know, you can drive for miles and not see a fence. There's no livestock in a lot of agriculture. And the livestock are an important component in a healthy soil. You need to have animals out on the land. So I contend if we start stacking all these enterprises, we'll improve the resource and we'll improve the nutrition produced on that land. You know, it makes no sense today in society. For instance, I'll give you an example. You know, eastern North Dakota, we have the Red River Valley with the Red River, and there's always flooding. The town of Fargo and Grand Forks, they flood almost all the time. Well, we've destroyed the water cycle. The water holding capacity in our soils is so much less than it was 100 years ago. And due to the fact that tile drainage, etc., we're just putting all this water down into the Red River, and now they're trying to get a bill through Congress right now for billions of dollars in funding to divert the Red River around the cities in eastern North Dakota. Absolutely ridiculous. If we would repair our water cycle and repair our soils, we could alleviate a big part of that problem, if not all of it. You know, it makes no sense. We're treating symptoms instead of solving problems.
So Gabe, another part of that would be that, you know, I mean, say like the Corps wants to build the dike or build the levee bigger, you know, let's go back up the system, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. That's all we have to do. On our operation, we have it documented where in 1993, we could only infiltrate a half an inch of rainfall
Yeah, listen to this.
per hour into the soil. So if we had any rainfall over a half of an inch, it was gonna run off, you know, and along with it, you'd have soil erosion, etc. Well, now with the soil health that we built, we're able to infiltrate over 8 inches per hour. Well, in North Dakota, we only get 15 inches of moisture here. You know, I have never seen it rain 8 inches in an hour. But we have so much water holding capacity now in our soil. If we'd improve the soils in the eastern part of North Dakota, we could alleviate a lot of these problems. But instead, they try and treat a symptom.
Just FYI, the Brown farm in 2012 was 142 bushel of corn, right, Gabe?
Yep. Yep.
Same county's average was 131.
And we're doing that on less than 15 inches of pre-seed.
What's your organic matter?
Yeah, our organic matter when we started was between 1.7 and 1.9 on those fields. We've tested those fields in July. They were from 5.3 to 6.1. And we now have a plot. My son and I have been working on a small plot area to see how fast we can build organic matter. And that plot tested 11.1. So we're able, and as you increase organic matter, you increase the nutrients that are available, of course, to the plants, but also you increase the water holding capacity of your soils considerably, you know, and the efficiency at which nutrients are moved throughout the soil.
Is there a period of time when you actually lessen how much nutrients are available because of the increased residue, that type of thing?
Just for a very, very short time.
Okay.
Yeah, that will happen right away as you move into more of a biological type system. Now, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a rancher that, you know, needed to make a living. But the thing of it is, it all ties to human health and the health of society.
Yeah. Gabe is, you know, we got some farmers here too. talk real briefly about that one test that you showed that's, or the one, what's your new, what Christine Nichols was showing, you know, on how you gauge your, you know, instead of the traditional.
Oh, are you talking about Dr. Clapperton's
Yes,
test
yes,
on
yes,
PLFAs?
yeah.
Well, all living organisms have PLFAs or phospholipid fatty acids. And you can take soil samples now and they're able to extract the PLFAs and to figure out the number of bacteria and protozoa and nematodes and fungi and all these different living organisms in the soil. And the test she had done on our soils, this is Dr. Joe Clapperton, she said that's the highest PLFA number she had ever come up with on a soil test in production ag. And so we know we're moving in, you know, a better direction certainly than what we were. So that's one of the things. We tend to get a lot of scientists who come out to our operation to either disprove what we're doing or prove it, you know, and we have an open door policy on our ranch. We let anyone come. In the last 5 years, we've had people from 16 foreign countries in all 50 states tour the ranch. So a lot of them are scientists who want to see what we're doing and do their tests, and I allow them to do it, you know. I'm happy to say we don't use no GMOs and no glyphosate for many years, so.
What are the principal animals that are the source of the organic material?
Yeah, but it's not the animals that are the source. The animals do a lot. Think of how our prairie soils were formed. Large herds of bison, elk moving across. Their job is to take and when they bite a plant, it signals, that plant then sends a signal to release root exudates and proliferate growth. It releases those root exudates, attracts soil biology so it can start regrowing. Then you have more root development. You have more root development, you're going to increase organic matter faster. So that's the role of livestock. And one of the things we've done on our operation is to integrate livestock back on the cropland. And so we get more plant growth, then we can increase organic matter in the system. Yeah.
How much does your cation exchange capacity increase?
Yeah, you know what? I gotta be very honest with you. I don't pay any attention to any of that. And I know the tests are there, and I've got the test back at the hotel room, and I can look it up. I don't pay any attention to it, because it doesn't matter to me. Yeah, so I can't honestly answer. I can if I go back to my hotel and pull out the last, because I brought my soil test from July, because I always get people asking me about it. But I haven't looked at that. I don't know, that's a good question. I'll have to look when we get back.
Well, one thing is that organic matter is extremely high in cation.
Yeah.
Sure that it's increased.
Oh, no doubt, yeah. But I just can't, I don't have the number on top of my head to give you, so.
Once you, Paul, share with the group what your goal is on the soil organic matter after he goes to the Marble Orchard.
Well, I'll tell them what you're gonna use me for then.
Well,
Build soils.
Yeah. So he's gonna recycle me, that's already in the plan.
No, the goal I have for our operation, at least by the time that I retire, is 12% organic matter. That's on native rangeland and cropland lakes.
On both?
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
What is your needed?
Native soils right now are 7.3.
Yeah.
Your soils around here, like,
David?
They're not exactly sure.
Jeff?
2 to 5.
2 to 5.
And there ain't many fives.
No.
Yeah, Norm, yeah, Norm.
I actually saw one of my presentations last year, a guy brought me a soil test afterwards, and it actually read 0. It actually read 0% organic matter. I'd never seen that before.
I'm surprised 1.5% in eastern North Dakota. I mean, that's pretty fertile.
Yeah.
Traditionally pretty fertile.
Yeah, but it shows you how degraded we are.
A lot of carbon burning? I mean, how did that come about?
Years and years of plowing, and then a rotation that's high in sugar beets and soybeans where there's not much biomass or organic material that can be converted to organic, and they're destroying it. But that's part of the presentations I give. I don't care where I've been farmers all across the United States, Canada, we're farming degraded resources because we've already degraded it so much. So all this talk about sustainability, it's a joke. Why do you want to sustain a degraded resource? We need to be regenerative, you know? So I get really upset when people talk to me that they're sustainable. Why do you want to do that? You know, we need to regenerate ourselves.
What were your cover crops?
Yeah, we've used, this past year we grew over 70 different species of crops, and we're mixing them. We'll grow up to 20-25 species in a cover crop mix, because that's what native prairie ecosystems were. They were very diverse. Paul, my son, teaches range management at the local college, and he brought his students out, and in one of our native pastures they counted over 140 different species just in one pasture, native prairie. Now if native prairie has that, look at farmland. We're growing corn and beans, you know, it makes no sense. We need to diversify, and the way to do that is by adding through cover crops. We can get more species growing. Then we'll get a healthier soil.
Mr. Judy?
How am I supposed to follow that?
Oh, you can. You got a lot to talk about. If you don't
Been
get
there, both of us, I guess 20-some years. I was born and raised on a farm. I never did actually realize the importance of management on grasslands. Once I started investigating and basically going broke, conventional cattle operation, and so I started doing some research, and long story short, today we've got I guess 10 farms. They're all within 5 miles of our house. We lease 7 of those. We own 3 of them, and we are cattle and sheep. Well, I did hear a quote, and the one quote that kind of changed our life was, your sole purpose in life should not be to own the land, but to control the land. And it kind of got me thinking, you know, I didn't have any money, I was going broke, and things didn't look very rosy for me to do in agriculture. And so I started looking around the house, and I'm like, wait a minute, there's all these barren, idle land around, and nobody's doing anything with it. Didn't have any fence on it, didn't have any water. But I knew how to raise livestock, or I thought I did. And I was doing better than most. So we started approaching absentee landowners and showing them what we could do with the land. And over time, it built up to 1,200 acres. And today, well, I quit my farm job, my town job in 2009. I am a full-time rancher now. In 2006, it was just a fortunate deal. I was at this bull sale, and I heard this South African rancher down in the bull ring, great big old guy, and he's sitting down there talking about he's got that English accent. He's got his slides up there. They're just terrible slides. You can't even see what's on the slides are. People are kind of mimicking him and laughing at him, and all I'm doing is listening. And he's burning my ears up. And he's big barrel tone voice, and we're not grass farmers. You know, everybody's talking about being grass farmers. We're not grass farmers. I said, we're micro farmers. It starts in the soil. And so that really woke me up. And he kept talking about using livestock as his landscaping tool. And so I raised my hand up. I said, but Ian, I said, how much lime did you put down? And how much phosphorus did you put down? Because this guy had basically quadrupled his stocking rate on his ranch in about 10 years. And it just didn't make sense how you could get 4 times the amount of cattle on the same amount of land without at least bringing some inputs in, bring the soil fertility up. He said, Greg, you don't listen very good. He said, I didn't buy anything. He said, it's the cattle. And so he's concentrated on keeping his mob of cattle in a mob, basically replicating what happened for centuries on the prairies. And that's what we've done. So we call ourselves mob grazers. So our cattle get moved every single day, sometimes twice a day, sometimes 3 times a day. But we're trying to keep our density up high enough that we're bruising the soil with their hooves. So we're basically igniting the soil life in the soil by this trampling the tilling, we call it the tilling of the hooves on the soil surface, breaking down thatch, breaking down carbon. So we don't graze our farms until we have something there to graze. We keep the cattle off. We have enough stockpile, what we call winter stockpile, it's grown the previous year. We're grazing on that in the springtime when everybody else is starting to graze and the grasses are like 4 to 6 inches tall. We're holding off. We're letting our plants get up here. Right when the plants get ready to put a seed head out, that's when we take off on them. So we're trampling. We have all this massive carbon. The cattle come in, we're focusing on the plants, just the top third of the plant. So the cows are coming across our farms, ripping off the top 3 inches or so, the top third, and they're trampling some of that on the ground, but we're leaving a tremendous solar collector in place. And that's what a plant is. I mean, if you look at the leaf, and it's gathering the sunlight, it's a solar collector. And if our cows take off too much of the solar collector, it cannot grow back efficiently. So we're just taking the tip off. The tip of the plant is closest to the sun. It's been shown that has the highest energy level. Well, energy is the most limiting factor on our farms. So our cows are getting a very good diet of high energy plant tips. We're leaving 2/3 of the plant intact. So it's keeping the soil covered. The sun can't get to the soil and dry it out. We're trampling some of this on the ground, so we're building what we call a surface litter. Well, when you put that much litter on the ground, there's an explosion in the soil of life. All these critters come up and start eating on this. So it truly is an interface between the soil and the plants. So we look at, we're feeding our livestock, but we're also feeding the livestock under the soil every day. There's more livestock in weight per acre under the soil than there is above the soil grazing on. So that's, we're kind of excited about that. We've taken worn out farms that nobody wanted. Basically, they literally wouldn't grow any grass. That's why we got them. And we've got some lifetime leases. Landowners are pretty impressed with what we're doing. They gave us a lifetime lease on their farms. So Jan and I can treat these farms like we own them, because kind of we do. Their kids can't sell them until we're dead. And I tell everybody, I just don't go hunting with their kids. They are. It's really worked out well. We've built tremendous relationships with these landowners. We've also offered them livestock ownership, so that now they own some livestock in our herds. We've built a grass-efficient genetic herd where all our cattle get is grass. And people are always, well, Greg, what do you do in the wintertime? Well, we got snow on the ground at home now tonight, and ice, and our cattle are grazing grass tonight. We grow enough stockpile in the fall that we can usually graze most of the winter. Now, if we get into a terrible ice storm or super deep snow, we will feed hay for a while. But we purchased all of our hay off the farm. We don't put any hay up on the farm.
What is that in Missouri? Super deep snow. 4 inches?
This guy, he has snow. We feel like super deep snow is 24 inches.
I'm just kidding.
This guy gets 80 inches a year. It's crazy. I can't imagine ranching with 80 inches of snow.
It's just water.
Yeah. White water. So anyway, we've come a long ways in our development of our genetics. We are doing grass-finished beef, grass-finished lamb. Our animals don't get any grain. The other big thing that we kind of hang our hat on is we don't own a tractor. So we're running, 250 head of cattle, about 250 head of sheep. We're running over 10 farms, and we don't have a brush hog. We run a mower, baler, rake. People say, well, how are you going to ranch if you don't have a tractor? We let the cattle do it. We've got 250 little tractors out there. But our tractors have baby calves. So that's kind of what our story's been. We're building up our soil. One of our biggest discoveries was a year or so ago. We actually came out in the springtime, early spring. It's just starting to get green. And we walked out in the pasture and looked at these manure paths, the whole paddock. They didn't look right. They'd been there, they were deposited there in January when the cattle went through there, eating the stockpile of forage. I I started looking at them, I'm like, man, these things look kind of rugged. So I picked up one and opened it up, and I almost lost my teeth. I couldn't believe it. There were so many worms in there, you just couldn't believe it. I told my intern, I said, run to the house and get a bucket. So we ran a shovel under one, we threw the whole manure pad in the bucket. We went to counting manure pad, earthworms. There was 462 earthworms in one manure pile. I was excited. I'm like, okay, we've got life here. And, you know, the average lifespan of an earthworm, you know how long that is? 7 years. And one earthworm in his lifetime will produce, him and his ancestors, 1.2 million worms. So you start doing the math on 1.2 million worms times 462 earthworms. I was really doing jumping jacks. You know, we've got a lot of animals out here. I mean, these things are working the soil over. You know, they've done some tests where if you get up 25 earthworms per square foot, they can put down 100 ton of earthworm castings per acre per year. People say, but Greg, you don't put any lime down. You don't put any phosphorus down. Nope, no. But earthworms are, you know, they're sourcing all this food. So we've got to get some life back in our soil, and that's what we're doing. We don't use any chemicals. Our cattle don't get wormed. Our cattle are very healthy. We don't bring any outside influences in. If you give a cow a good diet every single day and treat them like you'd like to be treated.
How many days you feed hay, Greg?
Our record has been 8 days.
8 days?
Yeah.
That's
From the
terrible.
whole winter.
That's terrible.
Yeah. That's been our best we've ever done.
Okay. 8 days.
Can you do any of this with pigs?
Pigs are not herbivores. That's the thing I have a problem with cattle. We've turned cows into grainivores. They're fossil fuel machines now. They're not fossil fuel machines. They're solar powered. They are designed to eat herbs. I'm sorry. The minute you start cranking all this corn into their gut, they don't do so good.
Now, tell some of the ones that are kind of town related, what the issues with the grain.
That'd be like us.
Yeah, like, yeah, tell them what happened.
I kind of feel, I know what the farmer feels like when I'm talking to him now.
I forgot where I was at. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the grainivores. So yeah, but tell them what happens when in the gut.
Well, basically, a cow is designed to eat forage, and the minute you start cranking corn in there, you take a gut that has a pH of 7 and turn it into acidic. And then you get E. coli.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, the other thing is the omega-3s
Right.
and 6s.
Oh,
Right,
yeah.
all your health
It
benefits.
upsets
Conjugated linoleic acids, it becomes a much healthier, less healthy product, you know.
If you look at the liver on a feedlot steer and they butcher it, how many of them are condemned?
Yeah.
It's huge. I mean, you can't hardly eat liver anymore. They got holes punched all through them. These cattle are so stressed, living in
Like how much liver do you eat?
living in manure, that their livers are burned up from feeding them a hot ration of antibiotics. They've got to give them antibiotics to keep them from getting sick. If you had to live in your manure and stand in it all day long, you'd probably be sick too. But we make them live in that environment. That's normal. That's normal cattle production. No, it's not. That's not normal. We make our animals do things that aren't normal, then we ask to eat that animal. That's not right. I'll get off my soapbox.
No, yeah, talk about the bacteria and the fungi in the soil.
Well, right now, we're starting to work with Dr. Lynn Ingham on looking at in other words, we don't have enough life in the soil to break up. There's an anaerobic zone underneath our farms, a lot of our farms, not Gabe. But in our farms, we've got there's weed patches in a lot of America. Like Gabe said earlier, we have nutrient dense. We need more nutrient dense food. As long as there's no life in the soil, how are you going to get nutrient dense food? You can't. It's impossible. It's talcum powder. I just saw a study showing where they did 5 different soils. They took continuously cropped soil. They took no-till soil. Well, Gabe does. He's done this test many times. He traveled with the guy that did it, Ray Archuleta. Anyway, I got a picture of it. continuously grazed, and then they had mob grazed, and then after they that, and Dr. Peterson was doing the test, where he left it not grazed, so it still had the sword on it. It was unbelievable. They're continuously farmed, conventional, and that water, and they shot water down over all 5 samples and collected the water coming off. On the conventional tillage, this is what everybody does. That water hit that soil, and I mean it ran completely off 100%. And it carried a whole bunch of dirt with it. There wasn't any soil, there wasn't any water that went through that patch of soil. And you go clear to the end where the Mom Grace farm went, that water hit that soil, 100% of it went right down through the soil and was collected underneath in a jar. There wasn't any, it was clear, very clear. I drank it, that's how close, that's how clean the water was. So, what it's showing us is, we've got to get some structure, we got some life. And then Elaine even say, well, why are we putting all this stuff in the soil to grow food on dead soil? Why don't we try to get some life in there? Some fungi, some bacteria, protozoa, nematodes. Let's get some life in the soil, and then we'll have healthy plants. And guess what? We have healthy plants, now we've got healthy animals. We've got healthy animals, now we have healthy people. What's wrong with that? So, we have a lot of work to do, but we're gonna, we're kind of up for it. We like sending the message out there, and I think it's a trend, and it's doing this right now. Just from what I can tell, I've been in this thing quite a few years, and thank goodness for people like Gabe and Mr. Huber, and there's a whole, Kim Barker, right? He's from Oklahoma. He's marketing grass-finished meats out on the land. I mean, he's doing a great job. So there's people on here. They're concerned, and we should be.
What's the questions that you're on the other end of it, with your consumer? Like, are you selling a lot of stuff in Columbia, or I mean, what are they asking? What's your story?
We got a wonderful email. I wish I had it pulled up right here. The other day, Jan sold a Berkshire pig to one of her professors at work, and they went through this email. I mean, she talked about how they prepared the pork, and they had special guests over for dinner, and they all sat down and they ate this meal. Everybody was just in awe of the flavors going through their mouth. And at the end of the letter, her husband goes, Jan and Greg, we just want to thank you for giving our pig such a happy life. That's why it tasted so good. That pig was happy. That's why it tasted good. I mean, I kind of had a tear come up. I mean, this guy he was getting pretty dang emotional,
What did you feed that happy pig?
That happy pig got to root like a pig.
Okay.
Every day of his life, he got to run around and eat grubs and chew on bark and eat watermelon and whatever we threw out there from the garden. He got to be a pig.
Well, that reminds me of some of the 70 or 80-year-old articles from different universities that talk about foraging pigs and swine. You asked about that too, I think. So it is possible.
It is very possible.
I think it's just because none of this, I haven't seen any of this stuff in the cardiology literature about.
We need more cardiologists.
No, we
Eating-
need better
eating.
soil.
We
I don't need
need
more
our
cardiologists.
Support
Yeah.
us. They need to help promote what we're doing.
Yes.
So, so.
What's the average omega 6-to-3 ratio in the U.S. population? Probably 18 to 1 or something, correct? It's pretty.
Sir?
You know.
That's why it's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible. It should be closer to 2 to 1 or 1 to 1. Which, people don't realize grass-finished beef has an omega 6-to-3 ratio of about 2 to 1 or 1 to 1, depending. Beef is as healthy as salmon if it's grass-finished beef, done correct.
Not,
And if we ask
the
the right
garden's in the
questions.
same river, right?
Wow, I was just curious.
Okay.
We had Bill Curtis came out to our ranch 2 or 3 years ago and did a documentary on our farm.
Why don't you share who he is?
Bill Curtis is Tallgrass Prairie. He was a nightly anchor in Chicago for many years.
Yeah.
And now he's the Cold Case, isn't that what it is? He does the TV show, what is it, Unsolved Mysteries? He's the narrator of the murder mysteries.
We don't.
Very, very deep.
Oh, yeah, I know what that guy
Yeah,
is,
very
yeah.
deep, distinguished voice. I love his voice. White-headed, very distinguished man. Anyway, when they came out to our farm and do a tour, his compatriot was out on the farm. And we just moved the cows off this mob of cattle off our pasture. We were rolling it back. He sees all these worms and caterpillars and bugs and beetles, and he screams out. He said, "My God!" He got on the phone and said, "Bill," he said, "there's life." He said, "We got to get this on a film. There's life on this man's farm." And so Bill sent a TV crew out from Hollywood, and we shot a documentary. It's called Beyond Sustainable. And in that, we went through the whole farm, what we're doing, and what Bill wanted to impress upon people was we shouldn't feel bad about eating beef as long as we're healing the environment along with it. So we're healing the earth, the soil, building topsoil, we're cleaning the water up, animals are healthy, the environment's healthy, and we're not destroying the environment we have to live in. We're still producing very healthy food.
We're improving the environment.
We're improving the environment, the air,
Wildlife.
you ought to believe, they had this thing set up. Bill was a professional, this film crew professional. They set up a microphone, had the big umbrella behind us, and they were recording the sounds of bees out in our farm. You hear bees, and the cows and the ripping of the tongues. It's really a good deal.
This stuff ought to be published widely.
Tell them, you both had the deal on the spider webs. Tell them about the spider webs, what that showed.
On the spider webs?
Yeah.
Which one? I forgot.
Well, you had one,
Well, just that, you know, if we let nature, the problem with agriculture today is it's man trying to impose his will on nature.
Right.
If we step aside and let nature, you know, do what she does, it's gonna take care of most of the thing. On our operation, same as on the Judy's, we don't use any insecticides or borons or anything to kill flies. We rely on nature, and Paul carries a camera with him all the time, and he documents everything. And one morning, he snapped a picture in one of our pastures of, it was just solid spider webs. And that's our fly control. You know, we want things like that. I had a call here just 2 days ago from some magazine. A guy was doing a story on pests and how mice and rats are destroying all this crop, you know, in the U.S. And he wanted to know what I do as a producer to control those. I says, I don't do anything. I let nature control it. Well, what do you mean? I said, well, we got snakes and coyotes and fox, and I never have a problem with those pests. And he says, you know, he says, I've spent 2 weeks calling producers, farmers, asking them about this, and they all tell me about these insecticides and poisons. He said, you're the first one that's ever said you're not doing anything. I said, why would I? I don't have to, you know. We got a motto on our farm. We want to sign the back of the check instead of the front. I don't want to write checks for those things. You know, let nature take care of it. It's simple.
We have a predator-friendly label on our farm. That's Jan's and my label. We got sheep, but we don't shoot coyotes. And if you shoot a coyote, 15 or 18 more are going to come in and take his place. And they don't know the rules of our farm, and so they're going to start killing. And Ian used to do that in Africa. There would be lions and leopards that were killing his livestock. And every time he shot one, then he really started losing livestock. So he said, you've got to re-educate the new chap on the block. And so
the chap.
Yeah, the chap, the new chap on the block. So we don't shoot any predators anymore. So.
Yeah, we run about 400 cows, and we have 2 miles from the nearest corral, out in the pasture. Paul's taking pictures of coyotes right out there with the cow's cabin. To our knowledge, we've never lost a calf to a predator like that. They're there just cleaning up day after birth, etc. But they never bother. It just isn't an issue.
And fly control with
Yeah.
them too.
Yeah.
Cleaning up the afterbirth so that the flies can't propagate. So.
There's a very device saying, and I won't say which state it's in, but it's on the state agricultural building as the kids walk up to school every day, and it says this: Nothing in nature is given, it is won. W-O-N. And you think about that mentality, what we're teaching our young people then, right? You know, in other words, you gotta get a really big stick, and if you don't beat the heck out of Mother Nature, she's gonna win. That's the exact opposite attitude we need to be teaching. Yeah, we need to work on, that's what we find, every time we try, and Ian said, I just get out of the way. He said, I just get out of the way. Nature does a pretty darn good job on it, just kinda stay out of the way.
But, I mean, this attitude of silos, you know, on how people look at things. I mean, you know, you gave a super example here of how you're trying to tie everything all together. You know, how do we need to break that paradigm of thinking about that, Greg?
I think we need to get more young people involved for sure, and that's something that Jan and I are doing.
Talk about your intern deal.
We've started an internship program where we bring in young people, they're disillusioned with far as trying to get started on their own. They don't know where to go to learn. They don't have any money. How do you get it? I mean, if you're, you know, Paul is fortunate, he has Gabe, and he's growing up on a farm. There's a lot of young people that want to farm. They really do. If they don't have the resources, they don't have the connections, they just can't do it, but they have a yearning and a love of the land. And so that's where we come in. We take 2 interns for 12 months. They live on our farm, you know, we give them a place to live, and they learn. And I teach them what we're doing. Unfortunately, you know, we're knocking out 2 at a time. It'd be nice if there was a place where we could, you know, large scale it up a little bit, you know, where there was funding, or maybe you had a place where you could bring in 12 and go through this mob grazing with them, show them the importance of animal performance, landscaping, you know, how to treat your forage, how to treat your land, how to treat your animals, how to select good animals, how to grow good food without destroying the environment, healing the environment, improving it, you know. And that was the purpose that Bill Curtis had on that film. He wanted people to feel good about eating meat. Instead of having a meatless day, taking Monday off, like what was it, Paul McCartney was saying, meatless Mondays, you know, every bite you take, you should feel good about that. You're helping keeping a farmer on the land, and he's healing the land.
Kim, you got anything you wanna add to what's?
I'll just second all that.
Yeah, what all you got going on here?
Well, we've got, beef cattle and sheep. And, 3 years ago, my daughter and son-in-law came back to the farm and they wanted to get some pigs and chickens, so I didn't have much time to think about it. We got them started. And we direct market down Oklahoma City to restaurants mostly.
Oh, into the restaurant trade?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, we're doing, I mean, we've thought about the intern deal a lot, but I don't think we're quite ready for that. I don't think we're that organized yet.
Yeah.
My son-in-law did not have a farming background, he didn't know anything. And I thought that, that would be a good thing, because we wouldn't have time to learn a bunch of stuff. Because you know, you hear about new 60 being the new 40, well, I think 30 is the new 13. Have you run into that? So this has been a harder deal than I would have guessed to get my
We've had some really good
But he's learning fast. I mean, he's had a lot.
One thing about young people is they have a very high energy level.
Yep.
And it really keeps me up going. I mean, I probably have more energy now than I've ever had in my life, just trying to keep up with it daily. And so it's good.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
But we've seen a lot of improvements on the land, and kind of like Greg, we've had people come to us wanting us to lease that grass and manage it because we know what we're doing. So I agree with all that.
When a fawn is dropped from the doe, it's at the highest level of energy in the nature. So when that doe needs to put milk into that fawn, really high protein, high energy browse is available in the bush. If she dropped it in the wintertime and the snow's flying.
Oh wait, bush or brush?
Bush. Ian calls it bush. In Africa, anything that we call brush, or Ian's always calling everything bush. I'm like, you South Africaners, you don't know how to talk. But, so we're trying to time that to, so when our calves drop, that's when we're getting the maximum flush of our grass. If a cow has the ability to select a very good diet on forage alone, she can pass all the correct antibodies through the milk back into the calf, and the calf can almost look at the cow and get pregnant. I mean, they just don't get sick. Folks, we don't doctor our animals anymore. We've got working facilities. The only time we use them is if we load an animal. We set with our animals. We love our animals.
Yeah, when there was this one picture I saw in your dad's slides, this guy over here, tell him about what you were doing when you were watching them calves.
I was enjoying my Corona Beach, which was out in the pasture in a lawn chair. In June.
Can I ask Dr. Huber a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
Cause I had someone, I was sitting at the South Pole Association booth and had a gentleman come up and ask me a question, and I really didn't know how to answer it. So he was saying, if I buy a piece of beef that was from grain fed, am I getting GMOs inside of me? And if I get the grass beef, do I get GMOs in me? Or does it go into the cattle?
The GMO,
Yeah.
the GMO doesn't so much, 93% or 97% will pass out through the urine. The 3% then, it's an accumulative process in every organ of the animal, including the meat.
So it'll be there.
And then thus we get it
Yeah.
too, and then it gets made up in our bodies.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. So, okay.
Is that as much of an issue as the, you know, all the corn sweeteners that are in all the foods?
Yeah, which is
Yeah,
worse.
I'll point out tomorrow, one of the big issues is how much formaldehyde you're getting. Had a fire at Algonquin in Iowa here last week, and it was an old elevator, no insulation, just a metal bin. With corn burned, and all the firefighters were overcome. When they got them to the hospital, it was formaldehyde toxicity.
From the GMO corn.
From the GMO corn. And so what we find is anywhere from 10 to 200 parts per million formaldehyde in the GMO. You never find it in a non-GMO.
Really?
A lot of toxicants that are in there because it's an extremely mutagenic or teratogenic process. And you disrupt the integrity of the genetic system. It's flawed science. You know, the theory behind genetic engineering is that you have one gene on one process or one function. But we had to throw that out with the human genome sequencing because there aren't enough genes there. Scientific American's headlines was, where are all the genes? 6,000 or 7,000 more functions than there are genes. And that's 30-year-old flawed science. So that you have a gene functions in relation to spatial relationship with other genetic material and the environment. And so when you disrupt that process, you do all kinds of make other changes. They have one surviving plant out of about 2 million. And then they never look for all the other changes. One of those changes is blocking that process that eliminates formaldehyde in normal metabolism, protein metabolism, or degradation of the glyphosate that's in the plant. Both of them will produce formaldehyde, but it's not being removed. It gets down to the formaldehyde stage, and then the rest of the machinery is turned off. So just a lot of differences.
Rich, did you have a question there?
I do. I've been busy teaching at Kendall. I've been teaching hospitality and sustainability, so I'm thinking a lot about global warming. Seems like this is a stressed out system already. So what do you all think will happen when the weather goes crazy? Or has, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, either has or gone, but.
Where have you been the last few months?
I always try to be neutral. I have my own thoughts on it,
But before we get an answer, could I?
Sure.
I'd like Dr. Huber to take your question a little bit further. If the livestock graze GMO corn stalks, GMO soybean stubble, you didn't answer it all the way, but.
In fact, the interesting thing is that most of your wild animals can tell the difference between a GMO and a non-GMO. You put 2 ears, I'll show you tomorrow, when you put 2 ears of corn, isogenic, GMO and non-GMO, put them up in a tree for 9 months, and the squirrels will hardly even scratch the surface of that kernel. The other one will be gone long before. And if they get bags get set back in the bin, don't get planted or just don't get shipped out, mice will completely clean up one and they'll eat the other one. Had a farmer from Florida tell me when I had a workshop down there a month ago, and he said, I just love Roundup Ready sweet corn. And I said, why? And he said, it's the first time we've been able to grow sweet corn and the raccoons didn't take an ear. I said, so you're going to feed it to your kids.
Wow.
And I think, we don't know why they can do that, but it may well be because of the formaldehyde, because you can take triple stacked corn about harvest time, and if you break that ear in two, you'll smell the formaldehyde in the cob.
So I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to kind of finish that.
So what do you think global climate change will do to a stressed out GMO agricultural based system?
I'm sorry, I missed that.
So what do you think that global warming, profound climate change will do to this GMO based, carbon based agricultural system that already seems a little bit fragile?
Well, the industry says we need more GMO.
That's exactly my thought. And
we need dicamba, since we have resistant weeds to glyphosate, we need 2,4-D and dicamba, and I reviewed the application on that for New Zealand, for the Ministry of Health, and they said everything's substantially equivalent. And so you look through and it has roots, and it has stems, and it has leaves. And then they said they only had to insert 4 base pairs to get resistance to all 3, and also to Liberty. So 4 base pairs gave them resistance to Roundup, to Liberty, to 2,4-D, and to dicamba. And then as you read back in the application, but we had to delete 4,385 base pairs to get those 4 to work. Well, the old idea was, and their comment was, but we didn't see that it made any difference, so these must be just fossil genes. Well, as we know from, again, the Human Genome Project, there aren't such things as fossil genes. It's a matter of that spatial relationship in the environment on gene function. And so when you delete 4,385 base pairs, you've taken one whale of a section of genetics out of that individual. You never had any of the regulatory genes inserted in that to start with, which you'd have normally had in a normal breeding project or program. All you've done is taken a foreign gene and thrown it in, and then hope that one of those 2 million seeds is going to produce what you want, and you don't dare look for all the other things that are being produced at the same time.
So theoretically, the GMO process could make the grains considerably more fragile.
I'm